If you are thinking about buying your first hybrid, you are absolutely not alone. But there's one thing you need to understand up front. Hybrid is not just one thing. It's essentially two things, and if you get this wrong, it could be such an expensive mistake. There's the HEV, the hybrid electric vehicle, kind of like a RAV4 hybrid or a Camry hybrid or a Kluger hybrid. I mention those Toyotas because Toyota is number one in hybrids, followed by Hyundai in number two. So there's that. And then there's the plug-in hybrid, which sounds like such a super simple distinction, but it's not really, because the difference isn't just the plug. I'm talking about vehicles like the Mitsubishi Outlander and Eclipse Cross plug-in hybrid, the Shark 6 from BYD, which has rocketed it from obscurity to number 4 or number 5 in utes, depending on how you measure it, and the Canon Alpha plug-in hybrid, which is also insanely popular and a relative newcomer. And obviously they do have plugs, and that is a difference, but it's not the main difference. The main difference is that they look similar, they sound similar, they both got the word hybrid in them, but they work in completely different ways and they suit completely different buyers. And the danger is that without knowing this stuff that we're going to get into in this video, you can go to the dealership with this clear intention in your brain, which is, I'm going to buy a hybrid, and then get talked into whatever hybrid the dealership wants to sell you. You should never ask for advice at a car dealership because they're incentivized to sell the cars that they need to sell. If you need a plug-in hybrid, if that's ideal for you and they don't sell plug-in hybrids, they'll try and sell you a hybrid, perhaps, or vice versa. So don't get advice at the dealership. Understand the nuance, know exactly what you want, what you need, what suits the driving you do, and go to the dealership if necessary to execute that objective, or even better, use my car buying service, which is obligation-free and liberates you from being talked into something that really doesn't suit you. Link in the description. For context, okay, hybrids are not fringe anymore. They're absolutely not fringe. You don't need to wear hemp and have dreadlocks and a bone through your nose or something to buy a hybrid. Everyone is doing it. So many Australians are going to buy their very first hybrid this year. Growth in HEV sales, like RAV4 hybrids and vehicles of that ilk, is up substantially on 2024. So 173,000 vehicles in 2024, just under 200,000 vehicles in 2025. So whatever that is, 17% growth or something off a broad base. And this is without any government incentivization. People just wake up one day and decide, I want a hybrid. So growth continues unabated there with hybrids. And obviously every hybrid HEV type vehicle that gets sold is a straight combustion vehicle that is not getting sold because essentially the market is stagnant and that's a zero-sum game. When it comes to plug-in hybrids, though, the growth has been flat out spectacular. A smaller base of about 53,500 plug-in hybrid sales last year. That was up from 23,000 and a bit just the year earlier. So that's like growth of 131% in the space of just 1 year and 40% up again this year so far. So plug-in hybrid sales spectacularly popular as well. And this is largely despite government incentivization evaporating on the 1st of April of 2025. So it went away on the 1st of April. Any government incentives there just disappeared. Plug-in hybrid sales went and just continued to grow. So the rest of this video is the essential knowledge in the briefest possible time, but with appropriate context, so you understand the issues and therefore you can go forth and make exactly the right decision. down into those two flavours of hybrid, the HEV and the plug-in hybrid EV. So HEV and PHEV, what do they mean operationally? How does it affect you? I made a list. I'm going to refer to my notes because there's a lot of ground to cover and I want to keep us on track and I don't want to miss anything. So the HEV, like your RAV4, Corolla, Camry, Santa Fe, whatever, just a hybrid, standard sort of hybrid, is the simplest and cheapest hybrid that you can buy. That doesn't mean it's bad. In some cases, it means it's freaking ideal. We'll get into that. There's no plugging in. It's got a tiny battery and a tiny electrical system because mainly what it does is it plays this mad game of voodoo with energy management. And I know there's a lot of marketing masturbation out there in the car industry, but this is not that. This is real, and it's just a tweak. It's an energy management tweak called regenerative braking. So how this works, okay? When you're in your car and you're driving just like you've driven for the past, I don't know, couple of decades, the light goes green, you accelerate, you burn these hydrocarbons, you turn them into speed, you acquire kinetic energy, and then bastard, the light goes red in front and you have to hit the brakes and stop. And all of that energy that you burned to get to 60 is gone. It's not a violation of the first law of thermodynamics, thankfully, because that's not allowed. It's just not accessible to you anymore because when you hit the brakes, you convert that kinetic energy into heat and it bleeds off into the environment and you don't get to use it ever again. So that's kind of a bastard. What a hybrid does is this regenerative braking. So light goes red, you're looking as far down the road as possible because 2 thumbs up, you're an excellent driver. You take your foot off the gas and then the whole thing goes into this limping along overrun kind of mechanism where the electric motor turns into a generator and it pumps up the big fat electrons and stores them in the hybrid's battery while you wait for the light to go green again. It doesn't trap all of your kinetic energy because that would be a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. It traps a bit, and a bit is all you need for this to be significant, all right? So you've got this energy that you trapped, which you would otherwise have lost. It's waiting there in the battery. When the light goes green, the hybrid EV's tiny little electrical system gets into gear, literally. The battery turns itself on, powers up the motor, and you get to use that energy which you trapped to get you going again. And by virtue of doing that, you don't have to burn any fuel to do that bit of the helping getting going again. So it's not a total free ride, but you just get access to some energy that you would otherwise have lost. This also works when you are just trailing down a hill. You know, you get off the gas, you're going down the hill, the regen kicks in, keeps you at a more or less constant speed on the way down the hill. You don't have to hit the brakes so often, so a little bit less wear and tear, few electrons go into the battery. And then when you need to get up the other side of the hill because you go over the bridge and whatever, then yay, fuel economy improvement. It's real. It's called regenerative braking. That's awesome. But you have to remember that your HEV, like your RAV4, Corolla, etc., the electrical system is just there for a bit of assistance. What it basically does is a trapped energy reinjection system. That's what it does. So it can't trap that much energy, therefore it doesn't have to be that big. It doesn't add that much cost to the vehicle and it doesn't add that much weight, but it just helps you a bit and you can get a substantial fuel saving, especially around town. Not so much on the highway doing like 100 because you don't do much of that regenerative braking at a constant speed. Anyway, around town, it's a real asset. So with a HEV, you just drive it like a normal car. No special input from you or anyone else who drives your car is required to recoup this benefit. It's kind of a free ride in that respect, and it is best for people who want minimum change to their driving lifestyle because it just operates in the background and you don't have to do a thing. It's not like being the jockey on a horse. There are no reins to this hybrid system that you need to hold. It just works. So that's brilliant. A plug-in hybrid is substantially different, and the difference is not just the plug. It's also the size and input from the electrical system. It's got a much bigger battery and a much bigger electrical motor and or motors, depending on whether there's motors at each end or just down one end of the car. Okay. And the reason for that is because in addition to the energy management voodoo that we discussed earlier, a plug-in hybrid can also suck electrons out of the wall from the grid, pump up its much bigger battery and operate at times as if it were just an EV or with a substantially greater amount of electrical assistance. And what you typically get out of a plug-in hybrid is double digits in kilometres, so tens of kilometres of EV driving range for normal kind of driving. Sometimes more than 100, depends on the size of the battery and the weight of the vehicle kind of thing. But this is a lot different than just your normal hybrid in terms of the size of the system, the weight that it adds, the cost that it adds, and also the input required from you to recoup the potential benefit from it, okay? You need to be more engaged with a plug-in hybrid than you do with a normal hybrid. So it can also deliver a substantial performance boost. I've got an example of that coming up, but when you think about the cost premium for a plug-in hybrid, that's sometimes pretty difficult to justify on the basis of the amount of fuel you might save, and putting a cost on the amount of emissions that you might save, that's a matter for an individual to figure out, you know, how important that is to them and what monetary cost they can put on that and justify it. But when you're talking about the additional performance that some plug-in hybrids offer, it's absolutely a no-brainer. It's the cheapest way to double the performance of a vehicle, and you don't have to risk not complying with emission standards and having an illegally modified vehicle and all of that stuff. They just come honking out of the box and totally compliant. So there's that. The downside is the weight, the cost, and the effort required from you to take advantage of the potential benefit built into this system, because you have to actually plug in. And you need to know how they work, because there are different operational modes that you can invoke via a menu with a plug-in hybrid, and some modes are better for some kinds of driving than others. There are battery preservation modes in SUVs and 4x4 utes so that you can preserve some battery capacity so that you've got electricity when you get to your campsite to run whatever, Metallica rock concert or something overnight, just to piss off all of your new neighbours kind of thing. So you need to understand a lot more nuance and complexity, and you need to take the time to actually plug it in. Otherwise, you are just carrying around all of this useless ballast, because there's no free ride. There's a lot of additional mass, and you paid for it, and you don't get the benefit if you don't plug in. So if you want useless ballast, just pretend it's an HEV and never plug it in, dude. This happens a lot with fleets, incidentally, when an employer says we're going plug-in hybrid, and they don't incentivize the actual operators of the vehicles ever to plug in, right? In some cases, the operators get pissed off because they have to plug in at home and it actually costs them money, so they don't plug in. They just go, bugger it. And there's no environmental benefit, and you just lose all of that benefit. They've paid for this needless ballast. And if you're going to do that, then just buy an HEV would be my strong advice. This report is sponsored by NordVPN. Get a mega discount plus 4 extra months for free right now with my exclusive deal. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC now. Online security threats are everywhere, but you don't have to be the next victim. That's where NordVPN comes in, locking everything down securely in the background. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC now. Every 2-year plan receives that huge discount plus 4 extra months of Nord for free. nordvpn.com/AEJC. Using NordVPN is easy. Just subscribe, download the app and connect. One click later, your IP address is shielded and your traffic is encrypted across as many as 6 of your devices. Nord is the fastest VPN on the planet. It costs only about as much as a single cup of coffee every month to keep your data, your identity and your devices secure. Masking your location means you'll be able to access content and resources that might be blocked where you live. Plus, you can continue to watch your favourite content when you travel. Boost your online security at nordvpn.com/AEJC. Get that mega discount and enjoy those 4 extra months for free. It's all totally risk-free with Nord's rock-solid 30-day money-back guarantee. It's easy to stay safe online. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC now. I understand exactly how focused many Australians and, let's face it, people around the developed world are about the cost of fuel at the moment with this insanity that is playing out in Iran with the mad king in America and various ratbag behaviours that typically go on in that region in an ambient way anyway, amplified by the whole choke point, the concept of the Strait of Hormuz. So there's that, and I get that people resent buying fuel, and you could save money if you buy a hybrid. Yeah, dude, you could, but let's not be kidding ourselves because A, if you're spending $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on a vehicle, you can afford to pay for the fuel. That's not the same thing as going, yay, I need fuel, but you can definitely afford it. So do you need to save money on fuel? Is spending 60 grand to save $20 a week, is that a good deal? Maybe not. But there are other advantages to a hybrid, like there are emissions and range and doing quote-unquote the right thing. And in the case of the plug-ins, there are other benefits. But let's stick to HEVs, right? There's a direct comparison I want to do for you on a really, really nice hybrid. Probably the hybrid I would buy if I just wanted super civilized family transportation, which would be the Hyundai Santa Fe Calligraphy. The fully loaded Santa Fe. Very nice 7-seater, very civilised transportation, available in Duos flavours. It's available as a straight combustion engine car with a 2-litre petrol 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, or a hybrid version with a 1.6, okay? The hybrid is slightly more expensive. List price, so minus on-road costs, a bit over $77,000 for that vehicle. That's the hybrid. $73,500 for the straight combustion one. But the straight combustion one is actually gruntier. It's 203 kilowatts versus 206 kilowatts, versus 172. So there's about 17% more power there. But because the hybrid is also heavier, it's about 75 kilos heavier off the bat, so the same as having one person in the passenger seat all the time, an extra one. Okay, the power to weight is about 20% difference. So you get a substantial amount of additional performance out of that Santa Fe Calligraphy if you buy the straight combustion one, and you will also save about $3,650 kind of thing. Now, that depends on you, but you will definitely feel the benefit of the straight combustion one when you're overtaking or when you're drag racing, which you wouldn't probably do in a car like that. But you might get yourself out on the highway and have to get around a B-double or something and miscalculate or misestimate the amount of space and time that you had to do that, and a bit of extra grunt comes in super handy in those situations, right? So the difference in fuel economy officially based on the standardised combustion engine test, fuel consumption test, ADR 8102 or whatever it's called, 9.7 litres per 100 for the combustion one, the straight combustion one, 5.6 for the hybrid. So 40%-ish better fuel consumption, not as much power. One of the other things that car manufacturers often do with hybrids is that they tweak their combustion engine to go with the hybrid. And they do that typically with a thing called the Atkinson cycle. And you'd want to look up whether or not the hybrid you were going to buy had that, because this is a good news, bad news story. It's a good news story for fuel economy, especially on the highway, because the Atkinson cycle is a valve timing hack. It effectively changes the ratio of expansion to compression in the combustion cycle, and it does that with the valve timing. That's good because it allows greater thermal efficiency by increasing the effective ratio of expansion to compression. Okay, so it expands through a greater range is what I'm saying by virtue of the valve timing. The bad news is that you lose a little bit of power. Okay, you can't get the same peak power when you tweak the valve timing in this way for thermal efficiency. So there's that. And what that means is you don't get so much benefit on a hybrid like that on the highway because it's not doing all of the regenerative braking that we spoke about earlier, but the Atkinson cycle gives it an economy benefit when you're cruising along in particular. So you do get another sort of supplemental benefit if you don't mind paying the cost of not having the same amount of power that otherwise you might, okay? Anyway, the combustion one there, more powerful, cheaper. The hybrid one, more expensive, more fuel efficient. That's how that plays out. If you want to talk about saving money with a plug-in hybrid, I think we really are off with the fairies here, okay? Because the best example that I can come up with of a popular plug-in hybrid is the GWM Canon Alpha. Now, I've driven that vehicle extensively and it's really good. It's a plug-in hybrid, but there's also a diesel equivalent. And the difference is profound in so many ways. Like it's $8,000 more for the plug-in hybrid, $58,990 for the diesel version, $66,990 for the plug-in hybrid. And you do, without the diesel engine, they replace it with a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine and the big fat electric powertrain. So how this plays out is the diesel one makes a maximum of 135 kilowatts. The plug-in hybrid, like 300. It's more than double the power. It's like a freaking ute supercar. If you've never driven a high-performance ute, this is one, and it's only $8,000 more. And $8,000 for double the power is the performance bargain of the freaking decade. I'm not making any comment about the fuel economy or the environmental benefit, quote unquote. I'm just talking about the performance. Like it is the cheapest way to double the power of a ute, more than double the power of a ute. You do add a substantial amount of weight though. The curb weight of the diesel one is like 2550 kilos. The plug-in hybrid's 2810, so there's 260 kilograms of additional mass in the plug-in hybrid. That's a quarter of a ton and you're carrying it everywhere. So the power to weight is double. Okay, the actual power is more than double, but the power to weight is double because it's offset by the additional mass somewhat. And the other thing is you've got to take the additional mass into account if you want to carry lots of stuff, because all of the mass you can carry is usually a bit of a zero-sum game. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But anyway, you're paying $8,000 more for this plug-in hybrid, and you're going to save maybe 15 litres a week if you're an average 15,000 kilometre a year driver, which would be like 300 a week. Maybe 15 litres a week is what you're going to save. So that's $30. And you're paying $8,000 more. So that's going to take you like 5 years to break even, 260 something weeks, you know? And for this reason, the whole saving money on fuel by buying a new car, that's crazy. If you're thinking about buying a new car to start saving money on fuel, that's nuts. Do something else. You know, there's 100 things you could do to save money before you bought a new car. It's different, I guess, if you're already thinking about buying a new car, current car's clapped out, you just changed jobs, so you gave your old car back to your old employer and your new employer said, buy whatever you want, you're thinking about a hybrid and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Saving a bit of money on fuel in that context, not too bad. Doing it just for that reason though, you know, buying a hybrid, particularly a plug-in hybrid for $8,000 more, to start saving money on fuel, That's nuts, okay? Environmental virtue, maybe you could argue a case for that. The energy security thing for our nation is a thing as well, because we've got endless coal here in Australia. And if you're plugging a car in and you can take some of the load off the liquid fuel infrastructure, that's good nationally as well. Yay you, very patriotic. But just to save money, I don't think so. So if you are prepared to plug in every night and exploit that EV running capability of a plug-in hybrid, yay. There's a bigger upside potentially in terms of fuel saved, but this is very usage case dependent, and it's also very you dependent, because you have to be able and motivated. They're two different things. You have to be able to plug in and you have to be motivated to do that, especially after the novelty wears off, like 2 years down the track, dude. Most people buying a hybrid for the first time, getting out of combustion only, they understand that. What's the benefit of a hybrid? So you can have a picture in your head about what that is. It might be different to what that actually is in reality. So I'll lay it out for you. The big advantages over combustion only are better fuel economy. And that means lower price every week, lower operating cost every week at the Bowser kind of thing. Better environmentally. You can feel better about it if that's a thing for you. This is especially true for hybrid EVs in urban and sort of mixed use areas. You try sitting here for 45 minutes and talking without falling over your tongue. Anyway, what I mean is, if you're living in the suburbs or a city, the actual advantage of a hybrid is going to be maximised, because that's where the regenerative braking thing is maximised. And that's 75% of the hybrid's big trick, right? You'll get a lower amount of fuel consumption and slightly lower operating costs compared with all of the logistic pain of going to a full EV. We'll get to that too, but it can be quite painful logistically to jump into an EV, especially if it doesn't really suit you and the driving you do. And the main difference that I see with a plug-in hybrid is that at times it's a huge performance enhancement, right? Like, I can't state enough how different it is to drive a 300 kilowatt ute, which the Shark 6 and a Canon Alpha plug-in hybrid both are, compared with a standard sort of diesel ute that produces like 150 kilowatts. And in many cases, it's cheaper than to buy one of these Chinese plug-in hybrids with double the power than it is to buy a mainstream popular Japanese ute like a Hilux Rogue or something of that nature, okay? So if we just think hybrid versus combustion, and we use the Santa Fe as a comparison, the calligraphy hybrid versus the calligraphy combustion only, then you're going to save, based on the official tests, about 12 litres a week. It's going to be roughly $25, depending on how insane the price of fuel gets. And over 4 weeks, that's going to be like $100 that you save. This is for someone who's got 70-something thousand bucks to spend on a vehicle, right? So chicken feed over a month. It's going to take about 3 years to break even on price if you're that kind of dude who's motivated by the spreadsheet, right? 3 years to break even. And you're going to have to tolerate the 17% less power, 20% less power to weight kind of thing, which could be an issue for you or not. Like, if a car is just transportation, you just want something that feels nice and glides from A to B, you won't notice it. But if you really like overtaking that B double in a timely fashion, if you're a type A driver with rabies, then you will notice that, and it will be a bit of a bastard comparatively, especially as you pay more for that. Okay, so the downsides of a hybrid versus combustion only, there's more complexity, and complexity is the enemy of reliability. The only countermeasure there to make a more complex system more reliable is you need to do superior R&D, like better engineering. You have to have better integration of the system. See, it's not just that you've got two systems. You also have a set of systems in place that allows the electrical system to talk nicely to the combustion system and integrate nicely with them. So you've got 3 times the complexity in some respects. You've got the complexity of combustion, the complexity of electric, and then you've got the complexity of getting them to have civilized relations together. You just want shit to happen with the powertrain when you brake or accelerate, and you don't want evidence to hit you all the time that this system's having trouble talking to that system because we didn't do the engineering properly. There's a reliability dimension to this too. The second law of thermodynamics says essentially that everything wears out over time. And that means you've got more complex systems, they've got more failure modes. Therefore, if you plan on owning a vehicle for a long period of time, it's more likely that you will incur more substantial repair and servicing costs as a consequence of that complexity. So that's a real thing, not so much if you trade in once every 3 to 5 years, because they should be okay for that. There's more weight, especially with the plug-in hybrid. And as discussed, that is a zero-sum game. It means that you'll be able to carry less stuff or tow less stuff or, you know, these sorts of weight issues. It also means that tyres wear out quicker. It's that simple. If you drive a particular way, then your tyres last a particular amount of time. If you maintain that experiment and just add weight, they wear out quicker, kind of thing. So there's that. The hybrid EV, like the straight hybrid, like a Corolla or RAV4 or something, it might trade performance for the Atkinson cycle, as discussed, and you pay extra for that and you get less performance, okay? Now, hybrids don't do as much energy management on the highway. So if you do routine highway driving, there's not the same amount of benefit on offer for you as if you're stuck in the city or the suburbs more often. You're doing a lot of stop-start because that's where hybrids really shine. So hybrids are not magic. They're not a solution without any trade-offs. They're a balance. The balance for combustion is here. The balance for hybrids is here. You have to figure out where you are on the spectrum. If you're over here, buy a hybrid. Going from combustion to a battery EV is a big step, whereas going from combustion to hybrid, which is part combustion anyway, hence the name, not such a big step. And this is where hybrids shine. They make a lot of practical sense for Australians who might be on the fence about EVs. It's easier to jump off the fence into a hybrid than it is to embrace the full EV works burger in one step, I think. So hybrids are much easier if you, particularly HEVs as opposed to PHEVs, they're much easier if you don't have access to off-street parking. Because to get the benefit of a plug-in hybrid or a battery EV, you need to plug it in. Like, to operate a battery EV, you need to plug it in. And to get the benefit of a plug-in hybrid, you need to plug it in. So if you're one of the hundreds of thousands of Aussies who lives in the inner city but cannot park off the street, has to find a park nearby and walk to your home from there, the hybrid makes absolute sense, whereas an EV or a plug-in hybrid, not so much because of the difficulty and the complexity. The same for apartment dwellers, right? Apartments on top, parking garage down below, typically. Stupid body corporate in between, right? The intelligence of a body corporate is usually limited by the dumbest member of the committee. And it's very difficult to get metered power points into apartments, which you need for a battery EV or a plug-in hybrid EV. So hybrids are an easy solution there. They don't require any of that. You don't have to get a committee of people on side to operate an HEV, whereas you would if you've got a battery EV or a plug-in hybrid. And if you really want to plug in and you don't have that facility at quote-unquote home, then you're going to spend a lot of time at some dodgy public charger, aren't you? And that gets old, especially if there's a queue. The long trip logistics of a hybrid are so much simpler. That's HEV and PHEV, so much easier to drive a long distance into the regions compared with a battery EV. Battery EVs are a long-distance complexity logistic nightmare, especially at holiday times when regional charging infrastructure is maxed out. Like, that can be a freaking disaster. Hybrid EVs, plug-in hybrids, you can operate them on liquid fuels all day long. It doesn't matter, you just keep going. So there's that. If you visit the regions regularly, it's so much easier to justify buying a hybrid. The upfront cost of the hybrid and the plug-in hybrid, so much easier to swallow as well. So you got to think about it like this. You've got a work and capability envelope of a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid that is bigger than an EV, and it's available at a lower cost. And this is why the people who are the most outspoken about EVs, who have embraced them the hardest and want to inflict their point of view on you, the EV evangelists, are typically the ones who go through all of this hardship. It's almost like a religion. You have to deprive yourself of this and that, and therefore it makes you feel so virtuous, and then you have to go off and evangelize, don't you? Literally, in the case of owners. But it's just easier and cheaper to operate a hybrid than it is a battery EV. If you really want to operate a battery EV, then you do you, dude. But please don't try and inflict its purported superiority on me, because there's no objective case for that, at least not yet. There's a broader range of genuinely usable hybrids as well than there is EVs, and there's a broader range of genuinely usable hybrids from brands that we know and trust with an established track record, and that's kind of important as well. We'll get to that. There's no battery EV ute or heavy tow platform that is viable. I mean, Ford did try this with the F-150 Lightning overseas. It crashed and burned. It was a disaster. So there's that. For a lot of buyers, this means that hybrids make a much better choice today. Battery EVs might be better in the future. The future is unpredictable, though. It's a maybe. It's almost certain that for the vast majority of new energy vehicle buyers, if you want to call them that, hybrids are a smarter, more pragmatic choice that offer many of the advantages and a lot less disadvantage at the same time. They're better than combustion on fuel, and they're easier than battery EVs on logistic criteria. I didn't want to do this to you, but I fear I must. I need to add another veneer of complexity onto this issue of plug-in hybrid EVs, okay? Because they're available in not just one flavour, but also There's two flavours of plug-in hybrid. It's a philosophical split, and they're very different operationally for different buyers, okay? There's one class of plug-in hybrid which you could call a range extender, but it's really philosophically EV first. That's one class of plug-in hybrid, okay? And there's another class of plug-in hybrid that's combustion first with EV assist kind of thing. And everything I've said about plug-in hybrid up to this point is absolutely true of both categories, but here's where they differ. The Shark 6 is a classic example of EV first. It's got electric motors at the front and the rear, and they're what generally drive the wheels for the vast majority of driving. What you've got the combustion engine in there for, it's a small combustion engine, only 1.5 litres of 4-cylinder petrol engine. It's there mainly to drive a generator. The generator tops up the battery. The battery provides the electricity to drive the motors that drive the wheels. That's how that vehicle generally operates. It's EV first, EV principally. The wrinkle here is, and this is the case with a lot of other vehicles laid out like this, including the Mitsubishi plug-in hybrids, so the Outlander and the Eclipse Cross plug-in hybrid. At highway speeds or at cruising speeds, typically greater than about 70 or 80 kilometres an hour, the combustion engine can engage with the physical mechanical powertrain and drive it directly. So the way this works is that there's no multi-speed transmission like there is in the car that you're probably driving now, like an automatic or something of that nature. There's none of that. There's just a single-speed transaxle between the engine, the combustion engine, and typically the front axle, okay, the transaxle. And there's an automated computer control clutch. When you get to cruising speed, if required by the driving conditions, the clutch goes engage, and then the combustion engine becomes part of the physical drivetrain and it can motor the vehicle along directly. It can't do that at lower speeds like driving around town or taking off from the lights because there's no multi-speed transmission and you would need the reduction of first or second gear or something to get you going in those situations, and that is not available. So you can only use the combustion engine to drive the vehicle, physically drive the vehicle at cruising speeds. I hope that makes sense. At lower speeds and at times at cruising speeds, it's just electrically driven like an EV. And if the combustion engine is running, it's just driving a generator to keep the battery topped up to keep forward progress happening. Okay, the other kind of combustion first EV, plug-in hybrid EV, is laid out pretty much like a combustion vehicle, and it's got an electrical motor going into the transmission to assist. And that's the case with the Canon Alpha plug-in hybrid, okay? So you've got a fairly conventional Ute 4x4 drivetrain. So you've got a 4-cylinder, 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine up the front, and then it drives a multi-speed transmission, like an automatic transmission. There's a transfer case that splits the drive front and rear because you want four-wheel drive. It's an off-roader. And it's got low-range gearing because it's an off-roader. And you've also got an input shaft from the one electric motor into the transmission so that the electrical side can drive the powertrain in the absence of the combustion engine. Does that make sense? They operate completely differently. Completely freaking differently, right? They're philosophically completely different. This is why the Canon Alpha plug-in hybrid is much better off-road, because it's got actual low range. It doesn't just have this quasi-low range of electric drive, which offers a large amount of torque at low engine RPM, like low motor RPM, electric motor RPM. This means that the Canon Alpha is much better off-road in gnarly off-road conditions. That's why they did that Beer O'Clock Hill publicity stunt when they released it, because it's better than the Shark 6 at that. The Shark 6 is going to feel smoother to drive around town because it's got fewer rotational bits turning and not burning at times, right? You're not driving a multi-speed transmission. You're not driving a transfer case. You've got an electric motor on that axle and an electric motor down this axle, high voltage cabling front and rear, and a computer telling which end to do how much driving. They're just different. But it's very important to realise what you're buying, because if you are a true off-road driving enthusiast, it's much harder to justify the Shark 6. If you're a tradie who drives around the city a lot and you just want nice smooth conveyance and you hardly ever go off-road, and if you do go off-road, it's really just a fire trail or, a couple of 100 metres of loose sand or something, then you don't need gnarly off-road performance, and the Shark 6 is probably a pretty good option for you. So it's a case of horses for courses, and understanding the nuance really matters. It matters before you sign a contract. All of this stuff matters before you go to the dealership. You have to know what kind of vehicle you're signing up for. It's the dud option from hell to go, "Oh, that looks nice," and be talked into it by the salesman, and then come home and discover that the Shark 6 would have actually been 10 times better for your use case, or that the Canon Alpha would have been 10 times better, kind of thing. So you need to know the nuances. How does the system actually work? What happens when the battery is depleted? Right? Or can you preserve the battery capacity if you're going to camp overnight with Metallica or something? What does it tow like? That's kind of important as well. What does it tow like when the battery is depleted? If towing is important to you, but I would make the case that if you're going to tow something heavy, you're probably better off just buying diesel because it's better for that. If that's the principal use, I wouldn't necessarily be going for a plug-in hybrid for that, or even any other kind of hybrid, unless it's a light trailer, unless you're going to do it infrequently, But if you're going to do the big lap with a big trailer, then I'd just be sticking with diesel because it just makes more operational sense. And then you have to ask yourself, what does it weigh? Because if you're carrying around 1/4 of a tonne of all of this additional stuff, that's 1/4 of a tonne of stuff that you might want to carry that you now can't carry. Another thing to think about is the packaging compromises, like has it got a spare tyre? That's a huge difference if you're going to visit the Outback, you need a spare kind of thing, and it needs to be the right kind of spare, and some hybrids just don't have a spare and some have a space saver. You'd want to cross all of those bridges before you actually buy the damn thing. And the other thing is, like we just talked about architecture then, if you want to think about it like that. Architecture is how things are laid out philosophically, how this differs from that in terms of its layout. But another thing that really matters here, that's even more of an unknown at times, is execution. Because if you're buying a Toyota or a Hyundai or Mitsubishi or something of that nature, you know what those things are. Okay, you know what Toyota is, you know what Mitsubishi is, you know what Hyundai is. They've got a dealer network, they've got a reputation, good and or bad, for customer service and support. They've got parts on shore, they've got technicians in their dealerships. They're not fledgling operations setting up, and that's what a lot of these new energy vehicles are. So you have to ask yourself if you feel like being a lab rat in a mad experiment, or whether you are more comfortable going with a brand that you know and trust. It's not just the know and trust, right? The upshot of know and trust is they've got infrastructure in place to deal with problems, whereas there's no evidence for how well sorted that is with this tremendous influx of unknown brands hitting Australian shores at the moment. Incidentally, I'd put GWM and MG in the same category as Hyundai, Toyota, Mitsubishi, because they've been here long enough. MG's been here like 10 years or something, and I think GWM is in its 17th year. So cut them a break for being here for at least a decade in both cases. It's a mistake, in my view, to put all Chinese brands under the one umbrella. The very new ones are unknown. The ones that have been here for quite some time, not so much. Much more stable, much more known. Only 2 more things to cover off, but they're pretty important. Now, the first one of those last 2 is the traps, the feedback effects and the traps. These are the things that people don't discover until they've paid the big bucks, they've got the car there, and then they go, Jesus, if only I'd known, if only I'd done a little bit more research. So let us open the door to what you should research before you park that car in your driveway. The complexity and the servicing and the unknown brands. You need to cross this bridge and make friends with it. Whichever way you jump is fine. It's a personal choice. If you want to invoke lab rat mode and go with an unknown brand, knock yourself out. There's no one who's going to ride in and say, bad idea, dude, don't do that. But just make friends with it up front. Don't discover that you did that and you should have known, okay? The performance envelope, like people talk about performance all the time. Car reviewers are notorious for this. They talk about performance as if the light goes green, how fast do you get to the end of the quarter mile? There's your performance, right? Performance is more of an envelope, and there's lots of different ways you can stretch the envelope, but it includes things like the payload and the tow capacity and even the spare tyre. Because if you're in the middle of fucking nowhere and you get a flat tyre and you discover at that time that your plug-in hybrid does not have a spare because they needed somewhere to package the battery and the only available space in that car was the spare wheel well, so they threw that under the bus. The performance envelope shrunk substantially in the domain of performance when you get a flat tyre. Instead, you usually get a 12-volt compressor and a tin of goop, like tyre sealant goop. And that helps, I guess, if you get a minor defect with the tyre, like a nail or something goes through the tread face. The goop and the compressor can really help get you going again in that situation. But if you get a major defect, like a big slash in the sidewall or something of that nature, you're going nowhere with no spare. You are waiting for a flatbed, and a 15-minute roadside repair, fitting the spare and limping to the next town to get a replacement tyre, turns into 6 hours at the side of the road on a holiday weekend. And this is a memorable family outing for all the wrong reasons, okay? You want to cover this off before discovering it at the roadside. Okay, you might want to fit, I don't know, a roof basket with a proper full-size spare strapped down to it in the case of vehicles without a spare tyre that you rarely take into the boonies. That might be an option. But do not just sit a spare tyre in the cargo bay of an SUV, because in a crash, the consequences are unthinkable. Newton's first law of motion is very unforgiving in that situation, I'd have to say. So the battery chemistry might also be something that I would consider. Given that it's 2026, I'd be looking for a vehicle with the superior longevity chemistry, which would be lithium iron phosphate chemistry, the LiFePO4 chemistry. What a mouthful, as opposed to the other kind of lithium ion battery, which is nickel, manganese, cobalt. They're both flavours of lithium ion, ION, but the iron one, like Iron Man, it's superior. The lithium iron phosphate has a lower energy density, which means you need a slightly heavier battery for any given performance from the battery. But it lasts longer and it's more amenable to multiple charge and discharge cycles, and it's also less likely to enter a state of thermal runaway and invoke a hazmat catastrophe. So there's that. Nickel, manganese, cobalt is more common in older style EVs and plug-in hybrids because of the higher energy density and the superior discharge capability of it. You can get more power out of it basically, but like everything else, it's an engineering compromise and it doesn't hold its charges well over time, and it could be more hazmat friendly, in the worst possible way. So it might be a good idea to figure out what style of battery chemistry there is there. You'd also want to think about your usage and does it fit? Like, you don't want there to be a real world usage mismatch. It's easy to fall in love with the concept of hybrid and not join the dots that you do so much regional travel so regularly that it really isn't a good idea for you. You don't want to think that hybrid is the only way to save fuel. You could just buy a smaller car. If you've been driving big fat mom's taxi and your kids have flown and you're still driving big fat SUV, maybe it's time to downsize, because there is a fundamental relationship between fuel consumption and the mass of a vehicle. And if you buy a lighter vehicle, you will drink less fuel and it will also cost you a lot less. That could be the simplest and most cost-efficient solution. You don't want to put yourself in the hybrid box and throw away the key if another box is more accessible and cheaper, kind of thing, is what I'm saying there. You don't want to pay for capability that you're never going to exploit. Like, you could be in a situation where it's really novel to buy a plug-in hybrid and you plug it in and you feel so virtuous and so righteous every day, and then, 6 weeks or 6 months or 3 years down the track, it just freaking gets old. You get home and you're in a rush and you've got shit to do and life is overwhelming. It's late anyway and it's pissing down with rain and it's cold and you've got dinner in one hand. Can you be asked plugging in? If you go, fuck it, then you've just paid for capability that you're not using. Why bother? Without the battery fully topped off, you're not going to get the performance and you're not going to get the fuel saving. You're not going to drive to the office in EV mode. Should have just bought an HEV, dude, kind of thing. And the final thing is this saving money paying extra money to save money on fuel kind of thing. You're not going to break even for 3 to 5 years. Is it really worth it, dude? Like if money saving is your principal motivation, you're probably barking up the wrong tree, I'd suggest. The trap is you pay for a bigger battery, you get more hardware, you get more mass and more hypothetical benefit, right? But the use case doesn't align. The ownership obligations of all of that stuff get old. You got to plug in all the time. The reason you bought it in the first place, right, just goes off the rails because you didn't do the research. And I want you to avoid that. And finally, thank you for sticking with me through this fairly substantial video, but hopefully you're deriving some benefit from it. The last thing I want to give you is like a checklist. It's a ready-made checklist of what suits who, what suits you kind of thing. Buy the HEV, like a RAV4 hybrid or that calligraphy, that very sexy calligraphy, right? If you just want the easy fuel economy boost and the easy reduction in emissions, and you want to take some of the load off the liquid fuel delivery infrastructure because you care about national security and things of that nature. This HEV, dude, all day long. Minimum change to your life. If you don't want to engage with this new technology, and there's nothing wrong with that, I personally don't want to engage that hard with all the stuff that my phone does in the background. I just want to turn it on and unlock it and check my emails, send an SMS, and I don't know, all the normal stuff that people do with their phone. I don't want to be a phone nerd. If you don't want to be a hybrid nerd, buy an HEV. And if you want the most streamlined new energy vehicle ownership experience, the straight, normal, conventional hybrid EV is right for you. You'd buy a plug-in hybrid EV if you can charge at home or at work, or there's some easy way for you to plug in regularly, and if you can be asked to do that. Like some people just can't be asked to plug in after the novelty wears off, and there's no law against that either. Doesn't make you a bad person, but it does make you an idiot if you bought it for 5 years and you can't be asked after 5 weeks, right? So think about that. Like, be pragmatic about it. Am I prepared to do that kind of thing? If your driving suits it, like ideally you'd be 20 or 30 Ks from the office. You can plug in every night in your plug-in hybrid. And then you can drive to the office and back in pure EV mode, and you'll forget all about the 2-for-1 Kit Kat meal deal offer because you'll hardly ever go to a servo, right? Like that is perfect for a plug-in hybrid. If your usage case is not that, then not so much. And if you value that performance boost, because a 300 kilowatt ute versus 150, it's a different experience. And $8,000 more for that, sign me up, dude. I am vulnerable to that kind of offer all day long. There's a case for sticking with combustion only though, isn't there? You know? If the hybrid price premium really doesn't stack up, or you can just get away with buying a small combustion car, do that, because that is lay down misere, the cheapest option. If your usage case is hostile to all of those things that we talked about that are a benefit for hybridization, so if you do a lot of regional travel and when you're in the city you can't plug in, just buy a combustion car. Do something else if you want to save money. You know? And if simplicity, long-term ownership, reduced complexity, lower potential repair costs, if all of that stuff matters to you, then combustion is still comfortably in front. I don't think a rational person could prosecute an argument to the contrary there successfully. I really don't. And finally, I'd say that although there is, you know, the argument about virtue gets played all the time, like it's virtuous to do this, it's the right thing. It's right down to the frickin' pronouns and Anzac Day and should we prosecute Ben Roberts-Smith and should we change Australia Day to Invasion Day? Like, I don't give a rat's ass about most of that stuff. I really don't. There's not a moral dimension to a lot of this stuff for me. There are more pressing issues, at least, to give a shit about. And this is one of those. People can tell you that this is the right thing to do, but it's really not a moral choice. We're not, in particular, going to start saving the planet 3 tons of intensively manufactured consumer products at a time. And that's essentially what battery EVs and plug-in hybrids in particular are. But that's what new cars are. You don't start saving the planet by replacing the 16 million light vehicles that we have on Australian roads with 16 million other light vehicles, especially if they're full of heavy metals in batteries and motors and endless kilometres of copper, high voltage wiring cumulatively and all of that stuff. Like, we're not saving the planet that way. That's a completely disingenuous argument. What we're doing is providing consumers with products that they like, i.e. cars, okay? So it's not a moral choice. It's a choice about what kind of car suits you best next, and not if we're transitioning to electrification and all of that. Because 100,000 EVs a year get sold in Australia, and there's 16 million light vehicles on the road. At the current rate, that's more than a century to replace them. Like, come on. Buy the vehicle that is right for you now, today. Do the research, and do not let a car dealer tell you that you are wrong, because they are incentivized to sell you the vehicle that is right for them, that suits their business. They've got a stack of plug-in hybrids out the back. Yay for them. If an HEV is right for you, then don't buy one, even though they can be very persuasive in the moment. Don't get sucked into that shit. Do the research, decide what you want, execute the deal at the car dealership, or even better, using my car buying service, because we won't stitch you up like that, but no obligation. Go to a dealership if you'd like to bleed all over the floor. No problem. Just do the research first, dude. Buy the vehicle that's right for you. And then, like everything else, it's a little bit like getting married, because, trust me, this is something I know a lot about, having done it so often. The thing you got to do is you got to embrace what's right about your current, let's call it, wife, and you have to tolerate the things that aren't perfect. And none of these choices you make, wives, cars, anything, are going to be perfect. Therefore, embrace the good, tolerate the bad, move forward. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you own one of those vehicles, please let me know what your ownership experience is. It'll be a benefit to someone who is on the fence getting ready to jump. See you on the next one.